And let me start with just asking you how you're processing all that's happening on Capitol Hill. There's what the White House wants. There's what Republicans in the House want, Republicans in the Senate want. We just heard that Senator John Hoeven of North Dakota says the top tax rate is going to be 38.5%. How are you, from your perch at the White House now, processing what's happening on Capitol Hill?
Actually, we love it. We're having a great time here because every time we hear more details, what we learn is that it's just reinforcing that our fundamental principles are still being met. That the concepts that we set up 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, however long it was, it said, look, the two things that we are most focused on, which is that the middle class gets a tax cut and their tax code gets much simpler on one hand, and that corporate tax rate is as low as we can get it. Right now it's 20%. As more details filter out, obviously we know a great deal about the House bill, just hearing some stuff about the proposed Senate bill today, those two principles are being maintained, which is very encouraging to the White House, because what that means is that they're taking our proposals seriously, they're sort of setting those in stone, and right now it looks like we're negotiating the smaller details of the program. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not important,
sure.
They absolutely are, but it's a signal to us that things are absolutely moving in the right direction.
All right, so this process is going to play out. Presumably we're going to see Kevin Brady and his cohort meeting with Senator Hatch and his cohort. They're going to try to hammer this out and marry these two proposals. What role are you and your colleagues in the White House going to play as all of that unfolds?
Well, it's sort of we're sort of involved and we're not. We're sort of involved, but we're also standing back and letting the House work its will, do what it wants to do with its bill, do the same thing with the Senate, and sort of maybe not be a scorekeeper or a referee, but just sort of step back and say, look, are our principles still preserved to what you're talking about? If they are, then that's great. Let's get down a little bit deeper into the details. But it's been a very positive working relationship. I know that Secretary Steve Mnuchin has been heavily involved, as is Gary Cohn. In fact, I think Director Cohn may be on the Hill as we speak today. But it's been a very positive working relationship. And again, I hate to be overly optimistic. Let's say we're cautiously optimistic about the progress we've made in just the last couple days.
We're going to split some details here. We had the House Speaker talking about who's going to see a cut this morning, walking back something that he said previously. He said today, at every income level, there's a tax cut for the average family. Is that something the White House can get behind here? Not that there'll be a tax cut for every family, but for the average family.
Well, again, what are our basic principles? The middle class, the average Americans, the hardworking folks, they get a tax cut and they get to pay their own taxes. Keep in mind, and not nearly enough folks talk about this, 90% of American families pay someone else to do their taxes. We think that's terrible, and that's why we want to simplify that code and make it fairer. And that looks like it's happening in every version of the bill that we've seen on the Hill, which is why it's so encouraging to us. So, yeah, that is our primary priority. When the House was talking at some point about having a 39.6 top rate, we sort of stepped back and said, look, if that's what you need to do in order to pass a bill that preserves our principles, okay, that's your input. We get that. We're sort of agnostic on that. It sounds like the Senate's come down to 38.5 based upon what you just told me. We'd be okay with that too. Our principles are still being seen to, and we still think that as long as those are preserved, we do have the impact that we want, the outcomes that we want, which is a dramatically healthier American economy. So again, the more details that come out, the better we feel about things.
Help me understand how you're going to score this thing. Are you going to use a traditional model? Are you going to go with the Joint Committee on Taxation, Congressional Budget Office, as has been done in decades past? Are you going to bring it in-house to the OMB, maybe go to the Treasury Department? What's the route that you're going to take there? Well,
most ordinary human beings, and that includes mathematicians, would not use the CBO method. That's a static method. That's the method that says, I'll go back to my old days when I used to be in the restaurant business. If I sold 100 burritos last year at $5 and I lower the price to $4 this year, the CBO would tell me I'd only raise $400 in revenue because I wouldn't sell one additional burrito. That's just nuts. That's the world is a dynamic place. The CBO is sort of buried in the 1970s. We get all that. We could talk a long time, I guess, about the weaknesses in the 1974 Budget Act that set up the CBO. But listen, they're the rules. We all play by them. But if you ask me how we look at this at the Office of Management and Budget in the White House, we look at through that prism of what does the world really look like, and we think the world looks like if you lower taxes, we get economic growth.
And you and me are going to get some burritos and talk about that 1974 Budget Act at a different time there, Mr. Director. Let me ask you about the corporate tax cut, a proposal here to extend that to 2019, not have it go into effect for another year. Is that something that this President, this White House could get behind if there were delay in the corporate tax cut?
Yeah, in fact, I heard some really interesting arguments just in the last hour about how some folks think that might actually spur more economic activity in 2018 because businesses would be interested in pushing even more investment into 2018 so that they could take the write-off at that higher 35% rate. That's a very compelling argument, I think. We're also interested in the House version of the bill, which would get that corporate tax rate down to 20 immediately. So I think there's good arguments in favor of both. Again, this is where we're sort of stepping back and saying, look, what do you need on Capitol Hill to pass a bill? I don't think any of those are deal killers for us, and that's how we're looking at it.
Last question here. How worried should I be? How worried should we be about December the 8th? We had this Schumer-Pelosi deal that led to a 3-month extension. Time draws near. December 8th is just around the corner. How worried about it are you, as we hear from Capitol Hill, that there isn't a whole lot of agreement on a spending bill at this point?
Yeah, every time that we come up to a funding deadline, I hear that the OMB director wants to shut the government down. Well, we didn't shut it down in April. We didn't shut it down in September. We're going to continue to work with the Hill on trying to figure out a way to fund the government. As you mentioned, we run out of money to fund the government on December 8th, but somehow, miracle of miracles, the government continues to work, and my guess is it'll be no change in December of this year.
Do you think we're going to see a temporary stopgap spending bill here? Do you think we're going to see something more fulsome, something that will go a little farther than that?
Well, we'd like to see something more fulsome. We'd like to see something more permanent to fund us through the end of the fiscal year, which would be through the end of September 2018. But the House really drives that. They're the folks who appropriate the money under our Constitution, so they'll take the driver's seat on that one.